Imagine yourself in a quiet room. You reach out, fingers tensed, and try to jab your own ribs. You know exactly where the pressure will land. You know the rhythm, the intensity, and the intent. You wait for the explosion of laughter, the frantic squirming, the loss of breath that accompanies a surprise attack from a friend. But nothing happens. It feels like a dull, mechanical touch, a non-event. You have just encountered one of the most sophisticated security protocols in the known universe. Your brain has effectively gagged your own nervous system. This isn't a failure of your reflexes. It is a calculated, high-level administrative decision made by your cerebellum before your fingers even moved. We spend our lives trying to master our bodies, to gain control over every muscle and impulse. Yet, in this one specific arena, our own biology stages a coup against our intentions. You are locked out of your own sensory experience. The question is rarely asked with the gravity it deserves. Why can't you tickle yourself? It sounds like a playground riddle. In reality, it is a window into the deep, often unsettling architecture of human consciousness. It is a story of predictive algorithms, evolutionary survival, and a biological governing body that treats your own touch like a low-priority memo. This is not just about a laugh. This is about how the brain defines the self against the other. It is the fundamental boundary of your existence. And to understand why that boundary exists, we have to look at the timeline of a biological mystery that has baffled philosophers and neuroscientists for over 2,000 years. The investigation begins not in a lab, but in the ancient world. Aristotle was the first to document the phenomenon, noting in the 4th century BCE that the sensation of tickling is dependent on the element of surprise. He observed that humans are the only animals truly prone to this specific type of laughter, and he correctly intuited that if the stimulus originates from the person themselves, the effect is neutralized. To Aristotle, this was a matter of the soul's anticipation. He didn't have the tools of modern neurology, but he understood the core problem. The mind cannot be surprised by its own actions. For centuries, this remained a philosophical curiosity rather than a scientific pursuit. It wasn't until the late 19th century that we began to categorize the sensation properly. In 1897, psychologists G. Stanley Hall and Arthur Allen identified two distinct types of tickling. They called the first kinesmesis. This is the light, feather-like sensation, the feeling of a bug crawling on your skin. Interestingly, you can actually produce a version of kinesmesis on yourself. If you lightly run a fingernail across your palm, it itches, it tingles. But the second type, gargalesis, is the heavy, laughter-inducing tickle. This is the one that requires high-pressure contact to sensitive areas like the armpits or the ribcage. This is the one that is strictly forbidden by your own brain. Hall and Allen realized that gargalesis wasn't just a physical touch. It was a social interaction. It was a play fight encoded into our DNA. Charles Darwin took this further. He viewed the tickle reflex as a mechanism for social bonding. He noted that tickling is the first form of communication between a mother and her child. It builds trust. It creates a shared language of joy. But Darwin also noticed a darker undertone. The laugh of a tickled person is often indistinguishable from a scream of distress. The body is in a state of high tension. The muscles are contracting. The heart rate spikes. Darwin's observation was profound. Tickling is a simulated attack. It is a way for young animals to practice defending their most vulnerable areas, the neck, the stomach, the groin, without the risk of actual injury. But if you are the one attacking yourself, there is no threat to practice against. There is no other to bond with. The system sees no value in the transaction. By the early 20th century, the mystery moved from the why to the how. If the brain was blocking the sensation, Where was the filter? In the 1970s, researchers began to experiment with mechanical intervention. They built Tickle machines. These were simple robotic arms that could stroke a subject's foot. When the machine moved independently, the subject felt the full force of the tickle. But when the subject was given a joystick to control the robotic arm themselves, the sensation vanished. The brain was somehow tracking the command sent to the hand and using it to cancel the sensation in the foot. This brought us to the doorstep of the modern era. We knew the brain was doing it. We just didn't know which department was responsible for the cover-up. The breakthrough came in the late 1990s at University College London. Neuroscientist Sarah Jane Blakemore used functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, to look inside the brain while people tried to tickle themselves. What she found changed our understanding of human perception forever. When someone else tickles you, two main areas of the brain light up like a Christmas tree. The first is the somatosensory cortex, which processes touch. The second is the anterior cingulate cortex, which processes pleasure and emotional information. In a normal tickle, these regions are hyperactive. They are screaming. But when you try to tickle yourself, the fMRI shows something startling. These regions remain strangely quiet. They aren't just less active, they are being actively suppressed. And the source of that suppression is the cerebellum. The cerebellum is often called the little brain. It sits at the back of the skull and contains more neurons than the rest of the brain combined. For a long time, we thought it was just for balance and coordination. We were wrong. The cerebellum is actually the brain's chief of intelligence and logistics. It is a massive prediction engine. Every time you move a muscle, the motor cortex sends a signal to that muscle. But it simultaneously sends a carbon copy of that signal to the cerebellum. This is called an efference copy. The cerebellum uses this copy to create a forward model. It predicts exactly what the sensory consequences of that movement will be. It calculates the trajectory, the pressure, and the timing. It says, okay, the right hand is moving toward the left armpit. I expect a high-pressure touch in 3, 2, 1, now. Because the cerebellum has predicted the sensation perfectly, it decides the information is redundant. It's old news. To save processing power and keep the mind focused on external threats, the cerebellum sends a signal to the somatosensory cortex to dampen or attenuate the feeling. It effectively turns down the volume on your own touch. This wasn't a series of isolated mistakes. It was exactly how the system was designed to work. This sensory attenuation is the reason you don't feel the weight of your clothes on your skin after you've been wearing them for 5 minutes. It's why you don't hear the sound of your own breathing unless you focus on it. It's why you don't feel your own eyes jumping as they move across a page of text, even though the image on your retina is shifting violently. The brain is a master of ignoring the self. It has to be. If we felt every internal sensation with the same intensity as an external one, we would be paralyzed by the noise of our own existence. We would be unable to detect a predator creeping up behind us because we'd be too distracted by the feeling of our own thighs rubbing together. But the investigation doesn't stop at the mechanics of the cerebellum. The Tickle test has become a vital tool in understanding the most complex psychiatric conditions known to man. If the inability to tickle oneself is a sign of a healthy, functioning predictive system, what happens when that system breaks? In the early 2000s, researchers began testing people with schizophrenia. One of the hallmark symptoms of schizophrenia is the delusion of control, the feeling that one's own actions are being governed by an external force. Patients often report hearing voices that they don't recognize as their own thoughts. When these patients were asked to tickle themselves, the results were chilling. Unlike the general population, many people with schizophrenia can tickle themselves. They feel the same intense, uncontrollable laughter and squirming that they would feel if a stranger were doing it. This suggests that in schizophrenia, the forward model is broken. The cerebellum is still receiving the efference copy, but it fails to use that copy to attenuate the sensory output. The brain fails to recognize the touch as self. To the patient, their own hand feels like the hand of a stranger. This provides a biological basis for auditory hallucinations. If the brain cannot predict the sensory outcome of its own internal speech, that speech is perceived as an external voice. The tickle reflex, once a playground joke, is actually the thin line between sanity and the total breakdown of the self. It is the mechanism that allows you to know where you end and the rest of the world begins. But why did evolution choose tickling as the battleground for this discovery? Why is the sensation so violent? To understand the wider implication, we have to look at the economy of the human body. Everything in biology has a cost. Laughter is expensive. It uses oxygen, it raises blood pressure, and it momentarily incapacitates the individual. The tickle laugh is a massive physiological expenditure. In a social context, that expenditure is a tax paid for the benefit of the group. It signals, "I am not a threat," and "I am enjoying this play." It is a submissive gesture. If we could trigger this response in ourselves, we would be constantly leaking energy into a void. We would be stuck in a feedback loop of self-stimulation that serves no evolutionary purpose. The brain acts as a harsh governing body. It manages your sensory taxes with brutal efficiency. It only allows the laughter expenditure when there is a clear social or defensive gain. By blocking your ability to tickle yourself, the brain is protecting your resources. It is ensuring that your most intense reactions are reserved for the world outside your own skin. This creates a fascinating paradox. We live in an era where we strive for self-knowledge and self-control. We want to be the masters of our own destiny. But at the most fundamental neurological level, our brain is designed to keep us in the dark about our own actions. It filters out the self so that we can focus on the other. We are, in a very real sense, strangers to our own touch. The timeline of this research shows a shift from viewing the body as a machine to viewing the brain as an architect of reality. We used to think we saw the world exactly as it was. Now we know that we see a curated version of the world, a version where our own presence has been carefully edited out to make room for everything else. The investigation into the tickle leads to a devastating conclusion about the nature of human consciousness. We are not a single unified entity. We are a collection of systems, some of which are actively working to suppress information from others. Your conscious mind is the last to know what your body is doing. By the time you feel your fingers hit your ribs, the cerebellum has already filed the report, dismissed the evidence, and closed the case. This isn't a glitch. It isn't a quirk of our anatomy. It is the very foundation of our ability to interact with the world. Without this self-dampening, the world would be a chaotic, indistinguishable blur of noise. We wouldn't be able to walk, talk, or hunt. We would be trapped in a cage of our own sensory feedback. So, the next time you try to tickle yourself and fail, don't feel frustrated. Don't look at it as a lack of control. Look at it as a sign of a perfectly functioning internal government. Your brain is doing its job. It is filtering out the noise of your own existence so that you can hear the rest of the world. It is maintaining the borders of your identity. The silence you feel when you poke your own ribs is the sound of your brain working at its highest level. It is the sound of a system that knows exactly who you are, and precisely because it knows you so well, it has nothing more to say to you. We spend our lives searching for the boundaries of the self. We look for them in our thoughts, in our relationships, and in our achievements. But the boundary was there all along, hidden in the space between a finger and a rib cage. It is a boundary maintained by a little brain that refuses to be fooled by its own reflection. You cannot tickle yourself. Because the brain refuses to talk to itself about things it already knows. It is the ultimate act of biological efficiency. It is the reason you can navigate a crowded street without being overwhelmed by the sensation of your own feet hitting the pavement. It is the reason you can focus on the voice of a friend in a noisy room. The brain is not just a processor of information, it is a filter of the unnecessary. And to your brain, you, at least in a physical, sensory sense, are the most unnecessary information of all. You are the constant. You are the background noise. Everything else is the signal. The mystery of the tickle is the mystery of how we survive in a world that is constantly touching us. We survive by ignoring ourselves. We survive by delegating the mundane to the cerebellum so that the conscious mind can pursue the extraordinary. In the end, the inability to tickle yourself is a gift. It is the gift of a clear channel. It is the assurance that when something truly important happens, when a real threat emerges or a real connection is made, you will feel it with every fiber of your being. The self is a quiet place, and your brain works very hard to keep it that way. The next time you reach for your ribs, remember that the silence you encounter is not a void. It is a shield. It is the biological proof that you are more than just a collection of sensations. You are a system designed to look outward. You are a creature built for the world, not for the mirror. Your brain has already moved on to the next problem. It has already predicted your next move. It is already 3 steps ahead of your conscious thought. And in that gap between the action and the feeling, you find the true definition of what it means to be alive. It is a quiet, steady, and unbreakable border. The system is working.